Hey guys, welcome back to the Dargon Gaming Squad channel. Today is going to be an episode of Player Perspective, and I have a special guest, Marquis Hartis.
What's up, everybody? Like she said, my name is Marquis Hartis. I'm 1/3 of A Point of Inspiration. I run a YouTube channel, Stereotypical Strider. Basically, on both fronts, we go about trying to inspire players with our games, our RPG supplemental contents, and playbooks and all that stuff. So you can find us on Facebook pretty easily, and that's about that for right now.
Sweet. So today we're going to talk about barbarians. A while back there was a post on one of the Facebook groups. I can't remember if it was your post or somebody else's, but somebody asked the question, like, what races or classes could you just live without? You'd never miss them. And since I'm more a player, you know, my response was, I can't bring myself to play a barbarian. And Marquis threw down the gauntlet and said, hey, we need to chat. So I thought it would be a fun topic. So let's just jump right in.
Yeah, wow. So it was on Sam, so Chalice and Chains post. He put it up. And the reason I commented specifically on what you said, Chris, is because much like you, back in the day when I first started playing, I did not want to play barbarians either. I was so exposed to this, the standard barbarian D&D character. You have an intelligence of like 6. Your name is Grug. You speak in grunt and you swing a big axe, right?
Right.
So for a long time, I just didn't play barbarians. I didn't care about them. And then I started seeing like Lloyd play from Y'all DM, and I started seeing some other people play. I was like, okay, so there's more to this. I started reading more. For reference, I'm a creative writing student in college right now. I'm in my senior year. I'm at an internship. I'm a writer, so I do a lot of like literary research and everything. And for my opinion, let me put it like this: all of my characters come from a literary place, right? I'm always looking for different references to add to my characters so I can play them in new and fresh ways, at least for me. So when it came to exploring the barbarian, that's really where I started, right? As a player, I was like, okay, so what are the barbarian characters in other stories and in history, and how can I use those to shape my character? So.
Right. So who are some of those characters? Like Conan's a really obvious one, but I guess maybe Xena, Warrior Princess. So a couple TV and movie ones, but honestly, I don't know if I'm all that familiar with barbarians, or maybe I've just never thought about, oh, this character's a barbarian. So like, what are a few that you would point us?
Yeah. To start with, I will start with Conan, even though he's very well known, but everyone knows him very much from the movie, right?
Right.
The movie, or even the comics. But in the original short stories, he's a lot different than both of those, right? He's a barbarian in the sense that he comes from a different place. He's very rough and tough, right? But he's also a thief. He's a very smart, very talented individual. At certain points, he knows all these different languages, all these tactics and everything. He's a very nuanced character after some of his stories, right? And that's the first thing that showed me that a barbarian didn't have to be a 6 intelligence, quiet or stupid guy, right? Because Conan has so much charisma in the short stories. Xena, too, had incredible amounts. But when it comes to the literary focus I mentioned earlier, there's a book by Paul Mayer called The Sun. It takes place... It's a Texas family story that goes from before the Civil War until modern times, right? Before the Civil War, there was a huge Native American tribe in the Southwest called the Comanche, right? The Comanche were basically the Mongols, all right, of the Native Americans. They drove out the Apaches. They completely stalled the Mexican army, right? And the U.S. Army had to keep going in and messing with them. And the Comanches, they were barbarians to me, and they had culture. They could do things that normal people could not do. One line of the book states this, and it's that you could take a Comanche, make him as naked as the day he was born, and drop him at any place in the earth, and within a week, he will have carved himself out a small kingdom, essentially, right? Okay. That one line has defined how I play barbarians completely since then, right? You're someone who's from a rough, wild land, right? Where the only way you can get by is not just your strength, but also your force of will and your ingenuity, and applying that in situations where it should not be applied, and just creating really cool ways to get to the next level to get your reward or just get higher up in life.
Sweet. So they're sort of the ultimate survivalists, sounds like.
That's pretty accurate.
That's kind of cool. I think one of the reasons that I've not been so interested in barbarians is I think video games always portray them as a race.
That's very true.
Not just a class. And so I realized as we were getting ready to do this video and I was kind of researching it, I realized, gosh, you know what? They're not a race, Chris. They're a class. They're a class. So you could be any race. And, you know, they're always portrayed as these, you know, really, like you said, unintelligent, unattractive, you know, creatures or beings. And they've just never appealed to me. But this is a cool perspective, and like thinking about them and kind of getting out of that box, that video game box of like, they're not a race, they're a class. And, you know, you could be an elf, you could be an orc, you could be any race you wanted to be and do something with this. So,
you know, that idea of race, all that really comes from Roman myth, Roman literature, Roman history, right? Where they lumped in all, like in basically elementary school here in the U.S. When you learn about like what basically collapsed the Roman Empire, you learn it was barbarians, but you don't learn what that means, right? So everyone takes that and they generalize it in the one homogeneous group, and that is where I think the deconstruction of what a barbarian is needs to begin, right? Because in reality, it was a whole tapestry, hundreds of cultures, countries, forces, the Franks and Germanic tribes, the Goths, the Celtics, the Moors, the Mongols, just so many groups. But basically Rome was like, if you're not Roman, you're barbarian, right?
right.
Terrible philosophy to have.
Right.
Very bad, but that's where that idea comes from. And so to tie back into the player perspective, whenever I play a barbarian, I always want to try and play it as a different race, right? So a lot of the times when I've seen barbarians, they've been humans. One interesting time, like in Dark Sun, the setting for 2E, for example, they have halfling cannibal barbarians, which is really cool. And in Eberron, they have halfling barbarians that ride dinosaurs, which is really interesting.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. When I first made one of my own settings, Kandwania, which is like Bronze Age fantasy, I made the elves very, like, basically, if you're an elf warrior, you're a barbarian, not a fighter, right? You fight savagely, and you're very in tune with your senses. There's one line in Conan, and this is paraphrasing slightly, but it says that his nerves were like a panther made of steel, just ready to pounce at any time, right? And it's like, when I think of how a barbarian fights or how they're moving when they're walking into a dungeon room or they walk into the tavern, that's the perfect line to describe them. They're looking around, these predatory eyes, because they're so used to knowing that there is something that can bite their throat out behind every single tree and every nook and cranny. So just taking that with other races, like you're an elf, right? You've been alive for 200 years. Think of the things you would have fought as an elf, right? Or you're a dwarf and you're underground, right? Think of how much danger there is in the Underdark and how you have to be ready for that, right? Or you're a tiefling and you have demon blood. Everyone already hates you, right? So you're always looking for that dagger in the back. You're always the panther just ready to pounce because there's really no other way to live. So race just always adds that extra nuance that just makes barbarians, to me, a pretty cool class.
That's pretty cool. I'll have to give that some consideration next time I have to create a new character. That's pretty awesome. So I noticed, so I did a little bit of reading in the player's handbook just for D&D, since that's the system I'm most familiar with. And I noticed that they're restricted to light or medium armor. So like what is that about mechanically? I mean, is that about like needing to be that survivalist and not making a bunch of noise, or like,
so it comes
what do you think is behind that?
It comes into play with two different facets. One narratively, and one in the fiction. So I'll start with not narrative. I mean mechanically, and one in the fiction. I'll start with mechanics. So Barbarians in 5e, they have a feature called I think it's unarmored defense, because the same one the monks have. It might be something else. But basically, when they're wearing no armor whatsoever, right, the barbarian can add its constitution, its strength modifier, I think it is, or its constitution modifier, one of the two, to their AC. The idea being that, much like Conan the Barbarian, right, you can just take on these fully armored threats, these dudes wearing the full plate mail and the swords and everything, basically in a loincloth or in a t-shirt and jeans or whatever, and you just these guys, you're tanking through every hit. There's one Conan story where he fights like this eldritch abomination, and Conan just gets torn to shreds, right? He's bleeding all over the place, flaps of skin hanging off. He's still just going off it. If you read Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire, the horse lords and everything, especially one that Daenerys is married to, he fights with no armor whatsoever, but he's never lost a single fight, right, in his entire life. So that fiction kind of comes into play there, but with light and medium armor specifically. That's where the barbarians are historically represented, right, in the D&D class. I'm going to go to an old favorite. That's Mesoamerica. I'm a huge nerd about Mesoamerica, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Otomi, all of that. So Mesoamericans, they wore quote-unquote armor, right? And it was pretty much animal hides and leather and sometimes like tree bark and stuff like that. Very light. Under the right conditions, I guess you could count it as medium armor. But usually light armor. The Goths, the Celtics, they all did the Celts. I mean, they all did the same thing, right? It's very light armor. The Mongols, very light, usually about medium. That's more metal in their stuff, right? But all these like historically barbarian peoples and everything, they use the light and the medium armors because it lets you move fast, it lets you move silently. If you can't. You can't really wrestle like a panther to the ground if you're wearing full plate, right? It's very difficult. And a lot of barbarians come from very harsh environments, right? So you can't be in the Arctic wearing plate mail, right? You'll freeze to death. You can't be in the jungles. You'll literally sweat to death and get down.
And maybe rust a little too.
Yeah, it will definitely rust. It's breaking everywhere. You can't do it. You can't do it if you're like a Mongol, like a horse archer, because you got to be very fast and very flexible. You can't do it in the desert. You'll literally burn to death. You'll cook in your armor, right? So because the harsh wanderer idea is so tied into barbarian fantasy, light and medium armor, or preferably no armor, is like the only way to really go about that.
Does make sense. Makes a lot of sense. Do you think some races are better suited to the barbarian class than others? Or I think we kind of already really covered that. You kind of said you thought any race could.
Were you talking like just mechanically or in the fiction?
Yeah, I guess mechanically. Yeah, I guess mechanically, and maybe fictionally too, because I think we all, I mean, going back to those like stereotypes of, well, they're always stupid, or, maybe there's some racial stereotypes that we have that, other people might be enlightened by having some ideas about.
So we'll start mechanically. We'll hit the obvious first, and then I'll go into the fiction. So mechanically, we're talking about in terms of 5e specifically. The half-orc is literally barbarian, the race, right? They get strength, they get constitution, and they have an ability, a racial trait called relentless endurance, where if they take damage where they fall to 0 HP, they instead only fall to 1 hit point, right? They can do that, I think, every long rest, I think it is. Now, the barbarian, who doesn't like to wear armor and has a huge meat shield because they have a D12 hit die, they're always getting hit. They're always getting messed up, right? Because the barbarian's always in there swinging, taking on 20 guys and Cthulhu at the same time, right? So they're constantly getting beat up and everything. So that's good. Dwarf, Dragonborn, those are also very good because you get the constitution and the strength. You're hardy, you're strong, and everything. Dragonborns can also breathe an element, which is pretty cool as a barbarian.
That would be, yeah.
That'd be super rare, actually. We'll talk about that in the fiction in a second, because I just had that idea. Then lastly, you have humans, of course, which can perfectly fit any class. So in terms of the fiction, I'm going to start with Dragonborn. So Dragonborn, right? Lots of people don't like them. I love Dragonborn. These big, hulking, dragon-looking, just monstrous dudes, right? But also very noble. So you might see them at night or something. But as a barbarian, so they have their scales already, right? They're all ready to fight. They have their claws, they have their teeth, but they also have the breath weapon, the pride and joy, right, of any draconic anything is to be able to breathe an element. So imagine we had our Dragonborn analog of Conan, right? We just call him, we'll call him Dronin, like we'll just be really on the nose. So we have Dronin here, right? Super strong guy, full of scales. He wears nothing but a loincloth, and that's him when he just is formally, right? He has a giant, the two-handed great sword on his back and everything because he's a Dragonborn. He wields literally the fangs of the dragons that gave birth to him, right? That's his reskin great sword. He comes from a culture, let's base it off of the Mongols, right? The Mongol hordes, the Mongol Empire. So they would ride drakes instead of horses. They were fantastic archers. Whenever they conquered someone, the Mongols, they let them keep their culture, right? So the Dragonborn, they conquer someone, but it's like as long as you pay a tithe to the dragon overlords for the horde and everything, you're good with your entire culture, right? They love poetry because the Mongols loved poetry, and they love weird beauty. Like they have fountains in every city. This is how you know it's a Dragonborn city. They have a fountain in the city. Instead of water, it's honey coming out, which is a real thing that the Mongols actually did, right? So boom, we're given the Mongolian culture, which is a barbaric culture, quote unquote, right? So you already made it nuanced. They're noble, they're poets, but they're fierce. They conquer without reprimand. They conquer without hesitation, right? So Dronin, he goes to this dungeon. He has something he wants to steal from the dungeon because he needs to steal things because there's no property, right? Because he's from like a very wild, rough area. You take what you can get because you're strong. He goes in there, right? His senses aren't like a steel panther's. They're like a steel dragon watching everything. He can smell the currency, right? He can smell the gold pieces, the gold coins down below, the hidden treasure, the gems in the statue's eye sockets, right? He's looking for traps because at any point he's used to arrows just flying at him as he rides across the plains. So he's looking around. He finds an enemy. We'll just make it something simple, like a bugbear, right?
Okay.
He finds a bugbear. He takes out the dragon tooth that he uses as a sword. They tussle for a while. Let's say that more bugbears come in, right? Jonan loses his sword. What he has left is, again, the pride and joy, right? So you have this super metal, noble, conquering barbarian. He raises up onto his haunches and he breathes out streams of lightning or streams of fire or streams of cold on everybody. The most savage thing you can do is literally slay someone with the world itself, right? And that's what dragons do. And that's why I think Dragonborn, right, would be good barbarians, right? And then we can flip it up from there. So we take something that's very non-barbarian, gnomes, okay?
Right.
No one likes gnomes. I don't really like gnomes, but gnomes are very interesting. They can do some very weird things. We're going to use Tinker gnomes because forest gnomes I think is too easy. So Tinker gnomes, they build stuff that's very steampunk. We're going to make Tinker gnomes. We're gonna make them Mesoamerican. Let's go with that actually, right? So Tinker gnomes have this whole big philosophy where if they don't keep sacrificing people to their gods, right, the great clockwork that runs all creation, it will stop, right? They don't do this because they like to kill people. They don't do this because they're evil. It's because people, warriors specifically, want to be sacrificed so that way they can work with the gods to keep this clockwork running, right? So boom, we've given these barbarians already a save the world culture that you don't usually see with barbarians, right?
Right.
Very short. They're very quirky a lot of the time. But that quirkiness is important because remember when I started this, the important thing I said barbarians has is the ingenuity and creativity. And what's more creative than the steampunk Tinker gnomes themselves? always looking for new ways to engineer solutions to problems, always looking at traps warily, always finding new ways to get past the obstacles. So these two races, I think, very different ends of the spectrum, but they just go to show just how nuanced you can make a barbarian character.
Way cool. Hey, that's pretty cool. Or Dronin. I got it finally. Awesome. This has been really cool. I feel like I had other questions, but I actually think you've already answered them all in everything else that you said. So I really appreciate you joining me, and I'm definitely gonna give some thought to like doing something fun with a barbarian here in a one shot or something. So
I really hope you do, because I feel like once you start looking at the different combinations, you put the culture on top of it, you can just make some really cool things people won't expect from a barbarian, but just feels so barbarian when you do it, right?
definitely. And I have to remember to think about that in any race or class that I want to play, or that I've been hesitant to play. There's quite a few that I've been just like, nah, I'm not really interested. So it's a good way to approach it. And I love that idea that you found something, some historical things to use as your basis, and borrow that culture and then make it fit. That's a really cool approach. Very, very cool. So thank you so much again for joining me. And guys, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give us the thumbs up so that we know to make more like this. And thank you, as always, for tuning in. And don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And until we see you next time, get out and get gaming.